All right, well, I think we're going to get started here. I want to thank everyone for taking the time. We're going to be talking about the new evaluation module that PTD is releasing today. We're going to be going over the basic training, talking about different elements of it. This training will be repeated more than just next week. It'll probably continue to go on through the month of March, at least once a week. And all the things we're going to talk about today exist on the help portal as well. So don't feel like you need to write everything down, or if I say something, you're going to forget about it, because there's a help portal with specific county documentation, and you can go into any of these different help articles, and they have summary videos in them. So just as a heads up, don't feel like you need to write down every piece of information we discussed today, because all of it exists on the internet on recordings. I do have the lines muted just for feedback purposes. If you have questions as we're going through this, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask any questions you have. If you want to use the Ring Central group chat instead, you can certainly just type your chats in, and I'll do my best to respond to them. I'll send out a test chat right now so everyone can see where that is. So if you unmute yourself and you don't hear me stopping, it's probably because there's still something going on with your mute. So feel free to type in a question if you have any. Before we get started, can everyone hear me all right? If I don't hear anything,
Yes.
Yep, it looks like we have some people confirming, so good.
Yes, I can.
All right, so what we're going to do is go over some PowerPoint slides, and we're going to do live demonstration, and I'm going to kind of walk you guys through everything you need to know for this year's evaluation. And as I said, if you have questions as we're going through, please feel free to stop me. And I'm going to turn on my bouncing screen mouse, my glowing mouse, so you can see where I am. So to start off, the evaluation ratio study module is a multi-function piece of software. And as the assessors, this is going to be the primary place that you go to deal with your interactions with the appraisal bureau. So when you're filing your abstract and your growth forms, you'll be using a different portal. Your credentials will be the same, but it will be a different piece of software. This application is designed to do two things: manage the evaluation and manage the ratio study. It has a bunch of other functions that exist within it, support functions, tax roll analysis, reporting, but those are kind of secondary. The module wasn't originally supposed to come out until later this spring, but last year, given the circumstances of COVID, it was determined that we should split the deployment and try to speed up the ratio study to get it out on time, because the new ratio study module really facilitates submitting your information electronically, and theoretically you could do the evaluation without ever seeing PTD. Whether or not they're going to come and visit you on site is something they're going to determine. I don't have any updated information on that front. So as I said, this is really a place for you guys to manage evaluations and ratio studies. Ratio studies will be coming out later this year, and from your perspective, it's really just submitting your ratio study reports. There are software tools that you can use to run your own ratio studies, but that's really up to you and if you want to use those or not. So the evaluation has not changed dramatically from what it's always been. There's a small change of terminology and information collection, but in general, the structure is the same. There's the organizational information where you list who's in the assessor's office and their training and certifications, associated properties. We have the documents that PTD is requesting. So those can be a treasurer's change order report, the county commissioner's report, the same kind of documentation they've requested historically. Of course, we have the questions, and the questions are essentially unchanged as well. They're broken down into categories, and you provide your answers accordingly. The piece that's new for this year is something we call a property list. And the idea behind a property list is that it's a report that you provide to PTD that contains only property ID numbers. So those could be UPCs or account numbers. So that could be an R number if you use Tyler Eagle. It could be an owner number if you use Triadic. And essentially what we do is we associate that list of IDs with the property information you've already provided in your assessment export. So the idea is that you don't have to pull a property record card for all these things. You just need to give lists of IDs. So many things that used to be documents are now going to become property lists. And we'll talk through it thoroughly, and there's a template you guys can use. We tried to make it as straightforward as possible. The property list is an Excel upload. So that's the new piece of this process. And from your perspectives as the assessors, I don't think it's going to really change much of what you've had to do in the past. So overall, I wanted to touch on briefly the workflow. Essentially, the evaluation has to go through the process that it's always gone through. It begins with drafting, and at that point, you as the county provide all your information, you upload all your documents, you enter your organizational information, you answer the questions, you upload the property list. When you're done with that, you submit it to the state, and it goes through a multiple review process there. They do an initial review, then they do a final review. At any point during that review, they can return the evaluation to you if it needs any correction, although we don't anticipate that being common. The way the evaluation works is it's much like a football. Once you submit it, you're throwing the ball to them and they're in possession of the information, so it can't be changed at that time. So once we get to the final review at the state and they complete their final review, we go into something called the comment period open. And this is when you as the assessors can log back into the application and see all the comments that PTD has made about the items you uploaded, the questions you answered. That's also where you have the opportunity to go in and enter your comments as the assessor and say, these are my comments based on what the state has done with my review. At some point, PTD determines the comment period closes and the process is over. Like I said, it really follows the basic gist of what you guys have always done. It's the same workflow, it's just being captured now within a piece of software. So the only time you can change your information is when the status is in drafting. And that is when the counties have possession and have the ability to add or remove or change any of their data. When the comment period opens, that's when you're able to enter your comments. And that's also the first time you'll be able to see PTD's comments about your evaluation. So just some points I wanted to note there in the workflow. So if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to take them. So I thought we'd start and just kind of go over the evaluation home screen. And we're going to do a live software demo, so you'll see. When you log into the application, and it is a web-based application, so you can get to it on any device or that's connected to the internet. You can get it on your phone, iPad, laptop, desktop, doesn't matter. And when you get into your evaluation page, what we've done is try to keep the application fairly straightforward. You have right here your status, and it'll tell you you're in drafting. You have the 4 different elements of the evaluation broken down into their categories. So we have the organization, documentation, questions, and property list. We have a submit button. By default, that submit button is disabled until you've met the submission requirements. So there are required documents and questions that have to be completed. Once you complete all of the required items, that submit button will become enabled and you can submit your evaluation. Directly to the right of it is a reports button. You'll see report buttons similar to this all over the application. Anywhere there's a reports button, there's applicable reports you can run. In this case, on your evaluation homepage is where you would access, say, your evaluation report, and that's where you'd see it. Below that, we have the activity list. And this is where anytime an evaluation changes status, a record gets added. So by default, it's empty. When you submit your evaluation, there'll be a record added that says evaluation submitted with the date and the user. And every time it moves through the process, whether it's returned to you and resubmitted or it continues to move through the PTD review process, every time that evaluation status changes, you get a record added to this activity table. So let's say, for example, and I don't anticipate this happening, that you submitted your evaluation, it got returned, you submitted it again, it got returned. You would be able to see all that activity history listed here in the table. So the idea is it just kind of gives you an overview of everything happening with your evaluation. Below the activity table, we have the post-evaluation comment area. By default, it's kind of locked and disabled. When you go into the evaluation status of comment period open, you as the assessors will be able to go in and add your comments here. So a little different than in prior years, you don't add your comments and on a specific document or on a specific question. You can just enter all comments you have in one place right there. So that's just kind of the layout of the home screen. It's fairly straightforward. We try to keep it simple. On the left-hand side of the application, you'll always have your primary menu, which will have all the different areas of the app that you have access to, your help button, and of course the logout. So during that drafting period, what you really as the county users need to be concerned with is just entering the information that's being asked for in those 4 specific sections. So it'd be entering your personnel information, uploading the documents, uploading the property list, and answering the required questions. Once you've answered and uploaded all the information, you'll be able to submit. Any questions before we jump into talking about your organizational information? Okay. So the evaluation organization area is where you'll enter all of the people and their associated activities, training, certifications, and properties. Now, this would be for the assessor's office only. Do I have a question coming in? Someone came off mute. I wasn't sure if I was going to be fielding a question. So like I said, feel free to come off mute if you have any questions. So in that personnel section, the first thing we're going to want to do is list everyone in our assessor's office. And then associated with them, we'll define what they do. So we call that their activities. So are they doing commercial evaluation, residential evaluation, mapping, front desk work, assessment administration, etc. Then you can enter any training or certifications those individuals have. And then finally, you can search through the property information database and associate properties with people, whether they own it, their relatives own it, or it's a rental property. In the first year, it will require you to enter all this information and kind of gather it together. But going forward, this information moves with you. So any information you enter for this year in your organization will be populated next year in your organization. The idea being you can go in next year and make any edits or adjustments you need to that data, whether it's removing individuals, updating their training, giving them new certifications, whatever it may be. So to get to the organizational information, we'll just select the organization panel. And when you do that, for all of you by default, it's going to take you to a page with an empty table. And that's because we have no organizational information entered yet for this year. So essentially, the table will be the place where all of your records get entered. So by default, we'll go in and we'll add a user. And when we do that, we're just entering basic information about them. Their first name, their last name, a title, the department, position, and type. For type, there's appointed, elected, or employee, I believe are the options. If the person's elected, you can enter their term expiration date and then provide their email and phone number. Once you enter a person, they appear in that original table, that organization table. So you can add as many people work in your office. So it could be 15 people that you have. This table would have 15 individuals in it. Each of these individuals has options under them. And this is a concept that you'll see throughout the application. Anytime you're looking, and I'm going to go back a slide, at a record in a table, and it has this actions button on the left-hand side, that's where you can get access to do additional things. And in this case, one of your options is to manage the information about this individual. When you select manage, it's going to take you to an informational page about them. So it's saying, this is Tim Axiom, he's the elected assessor, his email, his phone number. And below that, it'll show us 4 tabs. These are the activities, certifications, training, and properties that are associated with Tim. Now, by default, I'll have nothing in that table, so I'll want to go through and fill out that information. So here we can look at an example of how to add any of those different things to the table. So there's an add button in the bottom right-hand corner, and when we select it, a little menu pops down and it says, do you want to add an activity, a certification, a training, or a property? I'll quickly show you the screens and then we'll jump in and I'll do the demonstration on this portion. For activities, it's pretty straightforward. There's a list of different activities that you can select from. For any individual, we assume they're doing one to many activities. You'll select the activity, and then the percent FTE, you enter the percent of the person's time that they spend on that activity. You can add a brief description, and then you save it. So you add as many activity records as are needed to account for someone's full-time work. Certifications look very similar to that. You have the type of certification, the certification sponsor, so that could be TRD, IAAO, the Appraisal Institute, the date that the certification was received, and then any brief description about it. Training, once again, works the same way. The only difference with training is we have an additional CEUs field. So you select the type of training, the training sponsor, the date and description. Like I said, it's a lot of information to be entered, but next year all this information will be represented to you and you'll only be responsible for making edits to last year's data. The last piece of organization personnel is adding properties. Now, this process used to be conducted through the evaluation by PTD asking for property record cards for all the individual properties that are either owned or associated with people in the assessment office. Now you can actually just search through the pie and grab those records. And the pie is just a copy of all the data that's been provided from you all in the counties on an annual basis, and we'll have a new collection coming for that soon. So when you get to the organization section, essentially you're presented with a search form. You can search for the information, results are shown down below. And then let me back up one slide, sorry. What you have to do is pick a property link type. And essentially this is just determining how this person is related to a specific property. So this is just an example of the search filled out. We searched for Smith, and then we see the record in the table we want, and we can select it. You can select one or many records at a time, and then we associate the status, and we say these properties are owned by that individual. So I'm going to jump into the live demonstration portion unless there are any questions here before we get going. Sounds like I'm not hearing any questions. So what I am going to do is bring over the application. I'm going to be showing you two different versions of the application today. It's the same application, but two different versions of the actual evaluation. The one I like to demonstrate with is kind of an abbreviated version. And then before we wrap up, I'll show you what it looks like with the full template and that PTD has drafted for this year. So I've logged into the application. When you log in by default, you're going to be taken to your county. You'll have one option up here in the jurisdiction pick list. I have many just because I'm testing. But essentially, you'll log into the application. You'll be brought here to the entity homepage. By default, all you have is the evaluation option. A ratio study will appear later on for you, and there are other options that may appear subsequently. You also have a tax roll analysis pane that will take you to places like the PTD County Parcel Viewer. So that's a place where we can configure different links so you guys can get to different applications and see different things. So by default, that's just going to take you to the viewer that's available for the counties to search through the pie. So like I said, it's pretty straightforward to begin with. You have a primary menu here. You don't have a lot of options. You have entity, you have help. If we click on help, it's going to take us to the help page, and we can go right into our county users folder and see all the different articles that are available to us. We also have our log out button. So we can log out anytime from the session. The system does have a 15-minute inactivity timeout, and that's set by the state. So if you don't do anything for a 15-minute period, after, I believe, 10 minutes, you'll start to get a countdown timer presented on the screen, and then that will time you out and log you out of the application. That's not dissimilar to what you'd see in a banking website, for example. So here I am, the entity page, as we call it. So if I want to go into my actual evaluation, I'll just click on the evaluation link. And this looks much like what you saw in the training screens we just looked at. I have a question coming in the chat that I'll stop and read out. Can multiple users log in at once? Yes, you can have multiple users within your county. The only thing we suggest is that you don't have multiple users like trying to answer the same question at the same time, because that could cause some data issues. But yes, you can have an unlimited number of users. So as I said, we're here on the evaluation homepage. It looks just like it did in the PowerPoint slides. We see our different areas of the evaluation. We see our status. We see our submit button. When I hover over it, it says I haven't met the requirements to submit yet. And then, of course, we have our reports button here. No reports configured in the test server. By default, we have our activity records, nothing appearing. And then below it, we have our post-evaluation comment that's disabled right now. So to begin with, I can go to organization. I was fiddling with this before, so I actually have one test record. But as I showed you, you won't have any records upon logging in. And to create a record, we just select the blue add button. It brings up a very simple add form. We can fill out different information. In this case, we'll enter the department, their position. So make them chief deputy. We can determine, as I said before, if they're appointed, elected, an employee, or other. An other could be a contractor if you want to list contractors. If they were elected, you could enter a date for that term expiration as well. Put in my email, a phone number, and then I can click save. So now I've created this person, and they just exist as a person within the organization. I haven't added activities or anything else about them. If I wanted to edit the information about this person, I could always click on that actions button that we talked about and select edit. And that would take me right back to that form, and I can make any adjustments that I want. In this case, we want to manage the user. So that means we want to put activities in and search for properties, etc. So we'll select the actions button and select manage. So all this is doing is taking us to Timmy Testington's record, basically saying, okay, associated with Timmy Testington, what are his activities, certifications, training, and properties? So I'll begin by adding an activity. I'll select the add button in the bottom right-hand corner, select activity, and it will bring up my activity screen. Here I can enter an activity, and like I said, you might have someone who has one thing they do, and so they only have one activity record. You might be involved in 15 different things and have to break it down accordingly. So we'll start by saying commercial valuation, 25% of the time. So we're working on save that. Now I've added a record to say that Timmy spends 25% of his time working on commercial valuation. I see a question coming in as well. So if an employee quits and we delete them, will they be archived? The employee would live in the prior year. So the organizational information sticks in with every year it's in. So whatever you enter for 2021 will always live in 2021. When we move it forward to 2022, if you remove that person, it will remove them from 2022 only and not the prior year. So I guess in a sense it would be archived because we maintain each year as its own individual piece of information. So I could go in and add additional activities at this point if I wanted to. I could say, all right, the person spends the rest of their time doing residential valuation. Excuse my sloppy spelling. So now I've accounted for this person's time. I have activities in for them. And I can go in and further and add any certifications or training they might have. Now, obviously, not everyone has certifications, but if they do, you can add them. So certifications and training work in a very similar fashion to what we saw with activities. If I select training, it's going to ask me what type of training. So I can say it was state statutes training. Who conducted the training? Say it was TRD. Provide a date. put any description you want, and then enter the CEUs. So for some of you in the counties, you may try to use this as a way to manage who in your county has been trained, what certifications they have, how many CEUs they have, and you certainly can. Like I said, the information will continue to move forward in time, so you certainly can feel free to use this as a de facto place to track that information if you're not tracking it elsewhere. Certifications work the same exact way as training. If I went into a certification, I would just pick the type. So I could say, well, I'm a CAE. If I'm going to give myself a certification, I guess I might as well take the highest certification available. CAE. So I've added that in. So it's pretty straightforward, and you know, it's obviously fairly repetitive to go through and add activity certifications and trainings. Properties work a little differently. If I go here and I say add property, it's going to take me to the search form that we looked at before. And the goal here is that I'm going to associate any properties that are owned by this person, owned by their family, or they're renting. So what I'm doing is essentially searching for records here, getting results in the table below, and then for all the results that I select, I'll determine that relationship. So I'll just define it here. So we'll make it easy. We'll just do a Smith search. So I'm searching the PI database for anyone with Smith in their name. We see some records here coming up. I'll grab this Smith, 23 Daisy Lane, and then I'll say, what's the role? Well, I'm renting this parcel or this property, and I can add it. So now when I've done that, I've associated this property, and before you guys go live, you'll see account numbers listed here as well. That's a change that we're making. So it's going to list all the employees that are associated and what their association is. So in this type, a rent or a lease. So you could go through and add multiple properties at once. There's no limit to that. You can select 15 of those properties and say they're all owned by the same person. Any questions so far on managing people or managing the organization? And please feel free to chat in questions as well. So the organization part's pretty straightforward, I think. It's not much different than what you've done in the past, except instead of giving property record cards, you're just listing and searching for the properties that are associated with people. So next up is documentation. This and questions are very straightforward, and I think for most of you, you will have no issues. Essentially, documentation is the area where PTD has requested you upload some number of documents, and it can be a lot of different things. Some will be required and some will not be required. And it does tell you in the table which ones are and are not. And the idea is you just go in and upload however many documents you need to. So it's no different than email. So one of the things we've learned is that, say PTD says they're looking for a report to the county commissioners, and maybe you don't have that as a single PDF and you need it and you have it in multiple pieces. We allow you to upload those multiple documents and say all these individual documents together are my report to the county commissioners. So there's a functionality that it's not like if you are required to upload a document, it has to be a single file that gets uploaded. You can upload multiple items, and we do that just based on our experience in other states and other jurisdictions. That seems like that's sometimes can be challenging for people to get one PDF, or if there are things that are split over multiple documents. Once you've gone through and completed all the required documents, that's really it. There's not a lot to it, like I said. I'll show you very quickly. This is the documentation table. It lists all the documents, their status, any review status, which really doesn't mean much for you guys because that's related to PTD. When you go into any of the individual documents, you essentially just have an attachment uploader like you do on your email. You browse for a document, you upload it, and you just kind of keep cycling through until you've uploaded however many documents you need to. I think for many of you, it'll be a one-to-one. You'll upload one file per requested document type. In the bottom right-hand corner, you can save at any point and come back to it. But at some point, we need you to say, I'm done with this document and I'm marking it as complete. And the reason for that is because you can upload multiple files. If it was a one-to-one thing, as soon as you uploaded the file, we'd say it's complete, that's it. But since you can upload multiple files, we need you to signify that that completion has been done. So when you select the complete button, you'll be able to complete your process. Sorry, I'm just showing here, once you upload a document, you can always download it or delete it, and we'll demonstrate that momentarily. Once you've gone through and uploaded a document, its status will be set to complete. All you have to do is upload all required documents and set their status to complete to have your documentation complete. Like I said, that was a brief one. This is pretty easy to demonstrate. I'm still here where we left off in my organization. Something I want to make sure you're all aware of is this breadcrumb trail in the upper left-hand corner. If I click evaluation, it's going to just take me to the back step. I could go to Colfax and it's going to take me back up to my entity page. So that breadcrumb trail is just kind of telling you how far away from your original login you are. So you don't need to use the back button. You can always use that to navigate. So here in my evaluation homepage, we added organizational information in. Now I want to go down to my documentation. When I do that, I'm just showing 2 sample documents here. We see that nothing's been uploaded. We do have the required status, which I didn't have in that screenshot I just showed you, but that does exist. There are going to be a number of not required documents, and the reason they're not required is because some counties may or may not have them. An example of that would be your stratification approach for commercial properties. So some counties have enough commercial properties where they have a stratification and they're doing different analyses. Many of you do not, so that wouldn't apply. So things like that are listed as non-required documents. For any of the required documents, I see the information here. Once again, I see an actions button. So anytime you see that actions button, it's telling you that there's something you can do with this record. So when I click on it, I have 2 options, edit and notes. When I click edit, it's going to pull up the file uploader page. So like I said before, I just hit browse, brings up File Explorer. I can pick a file and upload it. In most cases, you're going to have 1 upload per file type. But like I said, if you have more, you can just keep going through and adding them. You can keep adding documents and keep going. And at any point, you can save and come back to it if you're not finished with it. Or if you're finished with it, just hit the blue complete button, and then your status will be set to complete. To be able to submit the evaluation, all of your required documents have to have an upload status of complete. Any questions about documents? I know it's fairly straightforward, but I'd be happy to take any questions about it. I'm not afraid to call on people. Moving on, let me actually just submit this file as well so I can show you guys a sample submission in a moment. So now I have my documents attached, pretty straightforward. If I want to go back to my evaluation page, I can just click on evaluation in the breadcrumb trail. So now I'm back to my evaluation homepage. We've done organization, we've done documentation. So we have 2 more to go, questions and property lists. Questions we'll go through pretty quickly because once again, this is something that is almost identical to what you've done in the past. The questions are broken down into categories. You go into each category, you answer the questions. Going into next year, you'll have functionality that will be beneficial for you as county users to see last year's answers and bring them forward. But obviously, since this is the first year in the system, we don't have that capability yet. Essentially, when you go to the questions section, you'll see all the different categories of questions broken down in tabs running across the top of the screen. Anytime you go to a tab, it'll bring you to that group of questions. Within each tab, you see all the questions listed, whether they're required, whether or not you've answered it, and whether or not it's been reviewed. Clicking on any of the questions will allow you to get access to it. Once you're in a question, you can simply hit save and next and just cycle through them. So the process is meant so you can kind of rapid fire answer your questions. When we select the edit button, it will take us to the question itself. We see the question written across the top of the screen. We can type in our answer. Next year, you'll be able to see the answer you gave last year, and there's a button that you can click to populate the answer. PTD does have control of who can and can't hit that button, and not who, excuse me, but which questions they allow it to be done on. So that'll be something that we'll talk about next year in the training. But at the very least, you will always be able to see your prior year answers going forward. I have another question coming through. Will we be able to print the evaluation? Yes, you'll be able to print off basically the blank report, which will just show you all the documents and questions and different items. We also have it in an Excel list we can send out as well to people. So for every question, I can enter an answer, and then I can hit the Save and Next button, and it's just going to cycle me through to the next question. The key is that your questions are listed as answered anytime you type information into them. So what you want to do is make sure that all the required questions say yes in the answered column. If you do that prior to submission, you'll be good to go. I'm going to jump over into the questions here. So once again, we're on our evaluation homepage. I select questions. In this case, I'm doing a sample, so we only have 2 categories. If I click on the tab, it just shows me the different questions within the category. If I select the Actions button and hit Edit, what's my favorite ice cream flavor? I can hit Save and Next. It'll bring us to the next question. When we do that, it'll return us back to the end of the list. So once we've hit the last question and we hit Save, it'll just take us back. Now, let's say, for example, we just wanted to answer one individual question. We could do that. Hitting Cancel will always return you back to the main questions page. So questions are fairly straightforward, and I'm hoping that the ability to see last year's answers next year will be beneficial to you all. That was something that we heard in our meetings with many counties when we went on site, was that ability to potentially copy and paste some answers that may be repetitive year over year. So we wanted to bring that functionality in. So as I said, questions are fairly straightforward and really unchanged from what they've been in the past. So once you've answered all the questions, really that's all you need to do. I would be happy to take any questions that anyone might have on questions. No questions? Everyone feels confident on the questions? I'm seeing a question. How about the typed report so we can check spelling and other answers? Yes, you can do that by running the report, and I'll show that to you guys. I think it's disabled right now on the test server, but you can run your evaluation report at any time. It's just going to only show your information, and it'll have a watermark saying it's not completed yet. Essentially, until PTD completes their review, anytime you generate evaluation, it would just be your content, not including theirs. And I believe all questions have a spell check built into them. Yeah, so if I space out, it's gonna say no, it's, wow, I really spelled ice cream terrible. So it will have a built-in spell check, but you can certainly print the information off at any time in your actual evaluation report. Any other questions coming in, either via chat or anyone want to come off mute and ask a question? Okay, so the last piece that we want to talk about for sections of the application are the property lists. And this is the thing that's new for this year. We tried to make this as straightforward as we could. And the idea is that rather than asking you to run all kinds of print-offs of property record cards, specialty reports, that we'd say, just give us the group of IDs that constitute some set of properties. So it could be a special ag, it could be your exempt properties, whatever it may be. So the property list is only looking for 2 pieces of information, an account number and or a UPC. The list must contain one of them. So we either need an account number or a UPC. If you're a triadic user, we ask that you only give us account numbers, and that has to do with how we process your data and deal with the owner-based relationships. So UPCs are not recommended if you're a triadic client. And essentially, this file will replace many different uploads that used to exist, many different what we would have called documentation. So the property list is very straightforward. It can be any spreadsheet, XLSX, so just standard Excel document. It has two columns in it. One is account number, the other is UPC. The sheet name has to be sheet 1, which is the default sheet name for any Excel spreadsheet. And all we need are the list of IDs that match whatever category you're being asked for. So if it's a special ag list, then you would just list all the account numbers and or UPCs that go with all of your special ag properties. On the help page for property uploads, there is a template, an Excel template you can download and use. The thought process here is that if we used Excel, you guys could either copy and paste from other reports you might have, or worst case scenario, just type in the account numbers. So this was in response to how do we deal with the fact that PTD every year asks for different things? And how do we try to make that less impactful on you as the county assessors and try to provide that information? So let me show you some examples. I have many examples of property lists that we've built for our testing. I'll just pull up one here for Los Alamos. And you can see in this one, we had almost no properties listed, but it just is a very straightforward document with account number and UPC in it. You don't have to provide both numbers for each record, but if you do provide both numbers, they need to align. So it needs to be the right account number for the UPC and vice versa. For many of you, I would think you'll find it easiest. Sorry, I'll pull up another sample here. You might find it easiest to only provide your account numbers. I know some people have issues with UPCs turning into scientific notation. There is a way to fix that. I'll briefly go over it. You can just right-click on the column, select Format Cells, and under Custom, just enter some number of zeros under the formatting, and it will revert the scientific notation back to the proper UPC field. Considering UPCs frequently get misinterpreted by Excel, I would recommend using account numbers because those are usually very cut and dry for you all. So the idea is that for any given item, let me just move all this stuff out of the way, you just need to provide your IDs. There's a list, and this is the actual list of property lists, so there are quite a number that they're going to be asking for. So I'll talk through some of them briefly. Non-government exemptions, non-government accounts less than $1, special ag grazing greater than 5 acres, special ag grazing less than 5 acres. It goes through irrigated and dry land, transfer parcels, parcels with filed protests. So they're asking for things that used to be property record cards or just random reports, depending on what county you're in and what you had access to. And now we're seeking to have that information provided in these files. When you go into the interface, you can upload the file, and there's essentially an uploader that's running on a 3-minute cycle. And whatever is available to be processed in that 3-minute window, the uploader grabs it and processes it. So, you know, if you upload a file, it can take up to 3 or 4 minutes for it to be processed in. All we're doing at that point is checking the file to make sure that you have the right column names, that the records look correct. And what you're trying to get to is a point where the record either says staged, which means it was uploaded correctly, or if you have an issue, external error. And if you have an external error, you're going to have to remove the file and re-upload it, make any corrections. Generally, if you receive an external error, it's going to be one of the very basic things, like your column header name is wrong, or the sheet isn't named sheet 1. And this stuff is in the help article about this as well. So I know this can be a little intimidating because it's new, but please don't be too scared of it. There's really not much to the property list. It's really just a fairly straightforward item. So if I go back to Colfax and my evaluation, I can go down to my property list here, and I see 2 for the sample evaluation. I see one that says my fully exempt properties, and I see my special ag method. So for any of these, I can go and say I want to upload it. Straightforward. I just get an uploader. I'm going to put in my Colfax file. Then I can go in and do my other file for Colfax. And like I said, by default, they'll have a status of uploaded. And what they're doing at this point is the files are waiting for the uploader to come by and grab them. And so I have 4:45 here on the East Coast, so I'm not sure if 4:46, if the process is going to kick off. I'm not sure which 3 sequence we're on. But essentially now it's going to start running. And anytime we can refresh the page, we can go and come back to it. But those records are going to get processed, and I'll either get a result of staged or an external error. So if I get an error, I'm going to want to go back and make an adjustment to those files. So let me show you another county I think I'm still testing in. I have to wait a second for the property list just to upload here. So the idea with the property list is it's now uploading and being checked against the PI, which is what we call the property information exchange. And this now allows PTD to kind of pull that other information. So now they know, the legal descriptions, the acreage, the values for these properties. So the idea is that you're not providing a lot of custom reports and doing different things. So as my property list, I'm just going to let it go for a second and upload, and we'll come back momentarily to it. I've essentially now gone through my evaluation. I've done the organizational information, I've uploaded my documents, I've answered my questions, and I have my property list queuing right now, or they're on their way in. So really, that is what constitutes the majority of the work that you have to do as the county users. And what I want to do now is actually go over, and I'm going to bring over a different server that's running the stage application to kind of give you an idea of what the actual template will look like for this year. So this is a listing of the documentation. So you can see there are a lot more documents than just a few that we looked at in the test server that we were on. The questions are quite a bit more substantial as far as the categories and the number of questions. Not any different than what you've done in prior years, but I just kind of want to highlight that the evaluation template I've been showing you is abbreviated, to say the least. And then, of course, we have our property lists. And there are a lot of property lists being requested. We see there are 15, so I can actually expand this list if I want and see all the different items that are being asked for. And I see there's one mistake here. This is just a test server. So you see there's a lot of information being asked for this year in property lists. And we anticipate this being a place where some people might have questions this year or run into some problems. Like I said, we really tried to focus on making this as straightforward as possible. I guess I haven't caught the upload yet. We might be on a 5-minute sequence on our own test machine. In production, we run on a 3-minute cycle. So this is a change for this year. And PTD is working through how this changes their workflow. What comes up after this, and once those property lists get uploaded, I'll submit for you. But I want to kind of talk about what should you expect after you submit. So this is pretty straightforward. Once you've met all the required criteria, you can submit your evaluation. And as we discussed, once you submit, you're basically throwing the football to PTD and you're saying you're in possession of the information now. You as the assessors can view it in read-only format. You won't be able to see PTD's comments until it's been completed. Something that's going to come up for all of you that I really want to highlight is outside of that football pass, PTD can still ask you for additional documents. And so they're going to be asking you for additional documentation for properties that were in your property list. Every time they want additional documentation about a property, you'll receive an email and it will say, PTD is requesting these documents for this property. And you as users can then log into the application and actually upload those documents. I'll show you an example of that momentarily here. Any questions so far? Well, we're kind of moving through here at the end. I know we have about 10 minutes to go, so I'm trying to make sure I cover everything. There we can see the status change, on this first Colfax record. So the processor is grabbing it. So we'll come back momentarily to it. I'm actually going to switch my county and just go to someone who's under review right now. See what's under review. Sorry about that. I know I was looking at one before that we just had under review, Reba. So if I go into my evaluation, this is how it will look for you as a user after you've gone in and submitted your information, but PTD has made this request for additional documents. So I can see in the activity table that the initial review was started by PTD. If I go into my different areas here, I see data, but I can't do anything. When I go to manage, I can't get at the specific data itself. The add button's gone. So what PTD is asking for in that email is specific information about properties that you uploaded in a property list. So when I get the email, I can go to the property list area of the application, and I see the different property lists that are existing. The property lists consist of all the things you uploaded to them, plus the system creates an automatic list, which is all the properties you indicated were associated with personnel. That gets aggregated into its own list. You don't have to upload it. The system creates it from all the things you enter in the org section. So for any of those properties, I can just click, or list, I can select view properties. I'll know which record PTD asked for the additional documentation on. I can always look in the docs field as well, because anything that has a date means that they've requested I give them, and it can be some number of documents. When I click on it and I say view additional documentation, it's going to show me that they requested an affidavit and a copy of the property record card. I can go in and upload those documents just like I always have. I anticipate that we'll do a, well, that wasn't a document, so I didn't like that. We'll do a secondary training on this for you all, because this is something that's not going to come up for quite a while. I don't anticipate many of you running into this, and I'm keep picking bad file types here, until well into your evaluation. So this is what used to happen for many of you prior to this, when you would request, PTD would say in their evaluation template, we want a 10-year evaluation history, but we'll tell you the properties later on. That is what this functionality is meant to fit, so that they can request any additional documents about any properties they need to after the fact as they're going through the evaluation. I see a question coming in. Do we need to download info from Triadic and convert to Excel for the upload? It depends on what you're trying to get, what the upload is. If it's a report that you currently have in Triadic, then we would say, yeah, run the report, and you can just copy and paste those account numbers into the property list upload file. Like I said, we have a template on the help page for that property list. If you go to help, sorry, the page is just hanging here. If I hit the help button, it's going to kick me to your help page. And if I go specifically to the property list help article, it's going to have the video that walks through property lists. And then down here at the bottom, there's an Excel spreadsheet that you can download. So you can always get access to that template as well. But the idea is that you're just copying, pasting, or entering the property IDs in that constitute the list. So I'm going to go back to where we were in Colfax quickly, just to show you the property lists. So we uploaded those two property lists. They now have a status of staged. So I've done everything I need to do to get to the point of submission at this point. And I've got my organizational information entered. I'm missing a property on one person, which is a problem. And then I have not answered two of my questions. So this is a great point. I should stop and explain this thoroughly. In my own mind, I thought I had finished everything I needed to submit the evaluation. So I got here and I saw that my button was grayed out. So this is going to happen to some of you. It's just natural with the amount of questions and uploads being asked for. So you're going to get to the point where you swear you've done everything, but then you're not ready to submit because for some reason that button's disabled. I would start by always going in and checking your status. Did you complete all the documents? And did you answer all the questions? Do they all have an answered value? And we can see that I skipped a whole group of questions. So I'll answer those. Hit the save button. Now, if I go back to my evaluation, miraculously, my submit button has been enabled. So for many of you, you'll do this. Obviously, you all just saw me do it. So it's kind of, the natural function that you can sometimes miss things. So go into any of those tables and check the statuses, and that's what will tell you what's not been done. So when I select submit, I get a pop-up here. It just says, "Are you sure you want to do this?" When I say yes, it's going to submit my information off to PTD now. So that's where we saw before. I was no longer in the drafting period. My status now reads submitted. So once I go into submitted, the only thing I can do is upload property documents as requested by PTD. And like I said, every time they request something, you'll receive an email on it. The final thing that you all have the opportunity to go through, and whether or not you add comments, it's your prerogative. You receive an email once PTD has completed their review, and it will say that the comment period is now open. So if you log into the application and you go to any of the different sections, you'll see PTD's comments. And those comments will be whatever they reviewed. So they give a status to each review item. It's either complete or deficient, and then they list any comments. At this time, you'll have the ability to go in and actually make edits to the post-evaluation comments. So there'll be a blue link here you click on, and a modal pops up, and you can just type whatever you feel free to type. As I said before, it's not, you're not commenting to their comments. It's really just your general comment on anything in the evaluation that you feel needs to go on the record. So that's a very straightforward process. Like I said, I anticipate that we'll do some reinforcement training in addition to the session that you all just sat through, which I know I'm running short on time here, that we go through about an hour. We'll continue to do these sessions once a week until everyone feels confident or the evaluations are complete, one or the other. And then we will also do some reinforcement training on the end of the process, because for many of you, this comment period won't open until the summer, by the time PTD is done reviewing it and opens the comments. So I don't expect you to remember what I told you here on February 24th come May or June. So we'll certainly do some follow-ups specifically around the property list upload of additional documents, just so people feel comfortable. And we'll continue to put more help documentation on our website as well. So I want to run through just a few quick items before we wrap, and I'll stay on as long as people want if they have questions. So you're going to get your account creation emails. They'll be sent out early next week. You'll get 2 emails. One will come from Axiomatic, that's us, and it will contain a numeric code. And then you'll get a second email from Santiago Chavez, the director of the division, which will include the link to request your account credentials. When you get that link, if you click on it, it's going to ask you to enter the confirmation code that we provided to you. And that's just so we can verify that the correct people are giving us the credential requests. Those emails will go out to all the assessors and deputy assessors in each county. The form that you fill out, you'll enter the names and emails of all individuals you want to have access to the system within your county. If you have users, we can create permission levels. Right now, all users would have the ability to submit at a county. We can disable that, so county users, you can have 2 levels, so users who can submit and users who cannot. We're really waiting to see if there's a demand for that before we institute it. So you'll get those 2 emails. PTD is wrapping up their template right now, so they're making their final adjustments to the questions and documents. They're wrapping up their internal SOP, because obviously this is a big change for them as well. They're shifting the way they do business. So I just wanted to cover that. And one last item, do not use Internet Explorer. It's an antiquated browser. If you use it, you won't be able to get through the program successfully. We recommend that you use Chrome, Firefox, Microsoft Edge, or Apple Safari. So I got in with less than a minute to spare. I am happy to take any questions. And like I said, I'll stay on as long as possible if anyone wants to continue on the conversation. So with that, I'll open it up for questions.